Increase in the supply of money, inflation.
Sorry, say again. Who was that? Was that gift? Or a person? Is it you, person? So let's think about it. Let's say that Alex, Bob, and Charlie each only have $1. Let's
So
say
sorry, I said it was the supply or increase in supply of money. So like leading to
that's
more inflation.
right. That's right. So if the government comes along and they've now doubled the supply of money, right? So now Alex, Bob, and Charlie, instead of having $1 each, they have $2. But let's go a step back to where they each had $1. Let's say that all of their other needs are met. Alex, Bob, and Charlie, they don't need anything else. But let's say they really needed that bottle of, they're in the desert. They've got everything else they need, but they need the bottle of the water, right? They each have $1. There's one bottle of water. What can we guess the dollar of water is going to sell for? Probably as much as any one of them is willing to pay, $1, right? Whereas when we then double the supply of money, we put them in the same situation, the price of that dollar, the price of the bottle of water is going to double to $2. They'll happily pay $2 for it now because we've doubled the amount of money in supply. So the bottle of water hasn't become twice as valuable. The purchasing power of the money has halved because we've doubled its supply. Okay, that's obviously simplifying it, but it's a very good analogy. So the increased demand, fueled by the extra money, prompts them to offer more than the initial price for the bottle. In the end, the bidding war causes the price of the water bottle to go up. This situation reflects a decline in their purchasing power. Even though they have more money, they can't buy as many bottles of water as they could before, showcasing the impact of monetary inflation on the value of their money. This example illustrates how the friends' purchasing power was impacted by factors outside of their own control, emphasizing the importance of understanding and questioning the systems that influence the value and supply of our money. Now let's explore how this plays out in real life. Now there's an in-person activity here that we typically do in a classroom situation. If we have enough time at the end, we could potentially do this if there's enough of you that are prepared to stick around and have a Lightning wallet. Do any of you yet have a Lightning wallet installed, set up with a Lightning address? I see Boson has one. Okay, no big deal. Essentially, this exercise just illustrates pretty much what we described here. When we increase the money supply, so in this is an auction game where each of the participants is assigned a random amount of money, and then there's an auction for a small prize. Then there's a second round where the amount of money is in supply is increased, so each of the participants is given more money, and then it's repeated one more time with the money supply being increased each time. And I think you can all guess for yourselves what the natural results of that would be, right? Even if the small prize is the same for each auction, people are going to be prepared to pay more for it because they've got more money to spend, right? This is just a table where we would put the participants, and then in round one, let's say each participant has between $1 and $5, right? We're going to expect probably the winning bid to be around $5. If we then triple the money supply to each of the participants has up to about $15, then we're going to expect the winning bid to be about $15. And round 3, if we quadruple it, give each of them $50, we can expect the winning bid to be at least $50. But what you might find is if you have some crafty participants, they might club together and say, hey, let's pool our funds, in which case the winning bid might go a bit higher than you'd expect, if people team up. But either way, you're going to find that your winning bid's going to be higher each round that the money supply is increased. And this is called monetary inflation, right? When we inflate the money supply, that's monetary inflation. And we also use the term inflation to describe price inflation. So when things get more expensive. So these are two different ways that we use the word inflation. One to describe the act of inflating the money supply, and the other, the consequences of that inflation on the money supply, and that is the inflation of the prices, or the decrease in your purchasing power of your money. So after doing the auction, how did the increase in the money supply affect the winning bids? As I just pointed out, they'd obviously be higher each round. What is the relationship between the money supply and inflation? When new money is injected into the economy, what happens? Prices go up, right? Do you think the change in prices are temporary or permanent? Why? Anyone want to have a stab at that one? You think the changes when there's an increase in the money supply and the price of goods go up, do those prices ever come back down, or are they permanently higher? I'd say from my experience, they're permanently higher. And, well, there's only more money. It's not like they're decreasing. The price doesn't come back down when we stop adding more money. What are other factors that can affect the price of goods and services? Anyone want to think of some other things outside of just the money supply that affects the price of goods and services? There can be like supply chain issues, maybe, or
Glenn,
yeah,
TM
go
said,
ahead, Desmond.
Hi. I
okay,
think another thing that can affect the price.
go ahead.
Sorry, I see. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Okay, I think another thing that can affect the prices of goods and services is if, probably for a particular goods or for a particular product, there are more competitors in the market who find a lower cost of producing the particular product.
Yeah, good point. Competition.
TM said our spending, like spending. Remy said access and accessibility. Usaya said demand and supply. I think-
Excellent.
yeah.
All good points.
Informa says interest rates.
Quite right. Okay. How do you think price changes affect people long term? Did you guys cover in the previous chapter the opportunity cost and time preference at all? You did? Yeah, so I mean, how do price changes affect people in the long term. Their time preference, especially, right, gets shortened. They have a shorter time preference in a scenario where the prices keep going up and up and up, because your fiat, your money, is going to buy you less and less and less as the longer you hold this. And so there's a psychological reason for you to look for ways to spend it, to preserve the value today rather than get less for it next year. So it tends to nudge people towards high time preference behaviors. I just want to make sure that you guys all have a good idea of high time preference and low time preference.
Yeah. And okay.
If the price remained permanent, how could it go down?
Okay.
Yeah, well, they don't tend to come down. They only tend to go up as the supply of money is expanded. The prices tend to go up.
Another message. Another question.
It makes people to have unwillingness to plan for the future. Exactly, correct. So that's what we mean by high time preference. Correct. Great stuff. So we're all on the same page there. So the impacts of individuals. Let's imagine this guy, Jamie. He's a college student who lives in a small apartment. He works part-time at the coffee shop to pay for his living expenses and his tuition. As soon as he starts living on his own, Jamie learns how to manage his own ledger. At the beginning of the year, Jamie budgets $10,000 for his living expenses, including rent, food, and all his other necessities. So let's have a look at these two words. What is a ledger? A ledger is a record of all of your transactions. Keeping a ledger can help you keep track of what you are earning and spending. And a budget is an estimate of your income and expenditures for a set period of time. So you can budget, you can have a budget of more or less what you'd expect to need to cover your expenses for the next 12 months or 6 months, however long you want to budget for. And then with a ledger, you keep track of your earning and spending. The better your ledger, your bookkeeping, the better your budgets will be. Obviously, you'll be able to budget a lot more accurately if you have a good ledger and a history of all of your transactions and earning and spending. Then you get a good picture of what it is you really need, how much income you really have, and then you can budget more effectively. So here's an example of Jamie's transactions for the month of January. He had a starting balance of $1,600. He paid his rent of $800, leaving him with $800. He bought groceries for $100, and then he got paid by the coffee shop his $500, bringing him to a total of $1,200 in his account. Then he had to buy gas for his car, and he had to pay his textbooks, and he was left with $650 at the end of the month. You can see this month cost him basically $950. 12 months later, while having lunch, he notices that his budget isn't stretching as far as it used to. So maybe he used his ledger from the previous year to estimate his budget, and now he's finding it's not covering his expenses anymore. He realizes that the prices of the goods and services he needs have increased significantly over the past year, and he wonders why. Then he sees this image over here in a newspaper, and he can't believe his eyes. And this is an actual image from some article covering the actual inflation on a burger. I think it was over in America. year-over-year change in price of ingredients of a hamburger. Over 10% up on the bread roll, 17.7 on the lettuce, a little bit on the tomato, bacon up almost 18, ground beef almost 15, and the rest like 9.2. So you can see, I mean, that price of the burger in just 1 year went up on average much more than 10%. Whereas that same year, the official CPI that would have been reported probably would have been well below anything like that. The cost of each ingredient in the burger increased, leading to an overall decrease in Jamie's purchasing power. Jamie's disciplined use of his ledger has shown him how his purchasing power has decreased over time. He knows that he needs to budget an additional $1,000 for the same goods and services that he purchased the previous year. So this means that his purchasing power has decreased by $1,000. He now has to spend more money to buy the same goods and services. So either he needs to spend, well, either way he has to spend more money, but he's going to have to work harder, you know, to get that money. So these were Jamie's cost of each item in the basket in the first year and the second year, as well as the percentage increase in the price. His rent went from 4,000 to 4.5, representing an increase of 12.5%. His groceries went up 15%, and his other necessities went up 5%. In total, his percent increase was 10%. So now he has to basically work 10% harder or longer in order to buy the same amount of things, unless he can negotiate for a 10% increase at the coffee shop. According to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, today's prices are 30.39 times higher than the average price in 1913, meaning that $1 today only buys 3% of what $1 bought back then. 3%. So like one Mars bar today would have been 33 equivalent Mars bars in 1913 had they been making them back then. But your money would have bought 33 times more what it buys today, the dollar. So it's lost 97% of its purchasing power. Imagine taking $100 in 1913 or waiting until 2024 to receive $3. It's like choosing between a lavish shopping spree in the past or just a couple of candy bars today. The difference is huge. It highlights how much value the dollar has lost over the years. And as I think it was Gift said, it disincentivizes saving. It's more advantageous to spend money now before its value decreases. And this hinders people's ability to plan for the future. As we can see in this graph, salary growth year over year. Sorry, Destiny, I'm getting some background noise there from you. Would you mind muting? Thanks. As shown in the graph, salary growth year over year in the US has remained stagnant for the average citizen since around 1971. This means that most people aren't receiving raises at the same rate as their currency loses value, despite having to work harder. 1 second here. So as you can see over here in 1971, the red line over here represents compensation or people's salaries. and the yellow line over here represents their productivity. In around 1971, 72, we can see, even though there was a close correlation between income and productivity, around this date over here, suddenly they decouple. And even though we continue to be more and more productive over time, as you know, technology and innovation keeps progressing, suddenly people's salaries stop going up in equivalent value. They just suddenly start to go flat and stagnate over here. So bear that in mind, because we'll come back there. I don't know if any of you know, you're welcome to pop it in the chat there, but what happened in 1971? So this compensation includes wages and benefits for production and non-supervisory workers. So this is, you know, for normal just wage earners. So it doesn't represent, of course, the people at the top. The purchasing power of the US dollar has fallen sharply over the last century due to rising inflation and money supply. And we can see over here in 1971 was when the gold standard was abandoned. So isn't that curious that when we went off the gold standard, when we went on to the fiat standard, when paper money was no longer backed by gold, is when we see this deep decoupling.
Decree 6102.
6102. Executive Order 6102, correct. So that was a bit before, I think, in 1971. Executive Order 6102 was actually the confiscation of people's gold, was when it was deemed illegal to hoard it, and people were expected to hand over their gold. I believe we will cover that possibly in this chapter. But that's different from 1971, which is when Nixon closed the gold window and the US reneged on their obligation, really, to make good on the backing of the US dollar by gold. And we'll learn a little bit more about that. So in 1913, the Federal Reserve Act, the central bank, the Fed in the US, is established. In 1929, we have the stock market crash. In 1933, the possession of gold is criminalized. That's Executive Order 6102 there in 1933. Then in 1944, the Bretton Woods Agreement, where it's agreed that the US dollar would be backed by gold and all other fiat currencies would be pegged to the US dollar. And then that was reneged on by Nixon in 1971. In 2008, you'll remember the banking crisis began what's known as QE, Quantitative Easing 1. That is basically just money printing with reckless abandon, which brings us today where we're up to QE, who knows what number now, and there's no end in sight for the money printers. In their struggle to keep pace with increasing costs, many turn to credit, which is like using a small plaster to cover a very deep wound. People take on loans, or they make impulsive decisions just to get by, right? Yeah. They might gamble what little they have just out of desperation. Fast money becomes a necessity, and individuals find themselves in a cycle where survival today takes precedence over planning for tomorrow, right? How do you plan for tomorrow if you're just scrambling to get food on your table today? So the fiat system impacts humanity's psychology by instilling a high time preference, a focus on short-term gains over long-term planning. Under a fiat system, certain groups get richer, but most individuals stay dependent on a system that makes them poorer and poorer. People around the world find themselves working more jobs and longer hours just to maintain the same standard of living. It's like being on a treadmill, running faster and faster, but never really getting ahead. The fiat system leaves individuals feeling like they're in a perpetual race against rising prices, and that's because they really are. I mean, I'm sure most of you are, have done your own groceries enough times by now to just see how the prices go up and up and up every single month, never mind year. And your salary doesn't keep pace. The increases don't keep up with the increase in prices. And this is also borne out. We see this all over the world where, in previous generations, it would be enough for a single parent to be at work and the other parents would be able to stay at home and help to, raise the children and keep order in the house. That's long gone. Even in places in first world so-called places like America, you have 2-parent families working 3 and 4 jobs and still struggling to get food on the table. And that wasn't the case in their grandparents and their parents' lives. And this is the consequence of rampant monetary inflation. And we've seen like the worst cases of these. We've seen some of the worst cases in Africa, in Zimbabwe, in South America. So in Zimbabwe, they've experienced hyperinflation more than once now. And in the late 2000s, the country's economy was hit by a combination of political instability, economic mismanagement, and external factors such as droughts and sanctions. And as a result, the value of the Zimbabwean dollar plummeted and the government was forced to print more money. And here we have the $1 billion note, but even worse, they printed the $100 trillion note. And this note, despite its high numeric value, would barely be enough at the time to buy you a loaf of bread if you were lucky. In 2008, the $100 trillion bill was introduced. Because of hyperinflation, it was worth only a few US dollars at the time. And despite its high face value, the bill was not enough to buy basic necessities, and people had to carry large bundles of cash to make everyday purchases. There's a video floating around on YouTube. I believe it's an interview with a chap in Zimbabwe. He's got a wheelbarrow piled high with money, and the interview guy asks him, like, aren't you worried that somebody's going to steal all your money? He's like, no, bro, I'm worried they'll steal my wheelbarrow because that still has some utility.
Wow,
I mean, we can laugh, but it's really a sad. Imagine being in that position where a wheelbarrow of money is like worth, you can't even buy your groceries with it. In Venezuela, poor economic policies and excessive money printing caused the bolivar to hyperinflate, leading to widespread poverty, food shortages, and political instability. This guy over here, I forget the exact translation to this, but it basically says he's got money, but he's hungry. And these ladies over here, they're entrepreneurs because all of the stuff that they're selling here, from these posters on the wall to these little purses, these are purses, ladies' purses for keeping your money in, are made from the local fiat, from the paper money, because they can't buy anything with it. It's worthless paper. And so they've turned it into stuff that they can try and trade for, to survive. The 2008 financial crisis exemplified the failure of a fiat system. Irresponsible lending practices, lack of oversight, and excessive money creation led to a collapse in the housing markets, massive job losses, and global economic turmoil. And this is how, the irresponsible acts of a country, not even your own country, some other nation on the other side of the planet can print too much money and there's consequences on the ground for you and I through no fault of our own. So the impacts on society then of fiat are the increasing wealth inequality. In a society based on sound money, a government's financial decision-making is tied to the people's approval. They can't just print more money. If they can't just print more money, they have to give you a good reason to hand over more of your own in taxes or whatever it might be that they're trying to spend on. In the case of an unjust war, maybe the citizens would not approve and would not hand over more tax in order to fund an unjust war. But when a government can just print their own money, they don't need their citizens' permission. In the fiat system, governments can go into unlimited debt on the backs of its citizens. The power to print money at will often leads to political centralization, and the fiat system enables governments to accumulate massive debts, making decisions that benefit themselves rather than the majority. Superpowers like the US gain an edge due to this phenomenon. They can print money endlessly to fund their plans, including wars. The ability allows these dominant nations to control, influence, and engage in geopolitical conflicts, creating a global power imbalance. Wars and major actions to control others become financially feasible for superpowers, while others without the same financial flexibility face limitations. Money printing allows governments in their tight collaboration with central banks to inject more currency into the economy. The receivers of this newly created money are those with existing wealth and status, powerful entities and individuals, right? I mean, you can look back to the lockdowns, for example. Where did all that money that was printed go? Very, very little went into the mom and pop's hands. It went into big pharma, it went into marketing, it went to all kinds of other stuff. But who's paying the price at the end of the day for all of that money printing? It's the little guy. These groups benefit from the freshly printed money before its negative effects, like a decrease in purchasing power, start to manifest through the economy, because they get to spend that money before the effects of the inflation. By the time everybody else has realized, they've already purchased hard assets, real estate, stock, stocks, all kinds of anything but fiat. You don't find wealthy people hanging on to their fiat. You find that they own assets that will store their wealth much better than does fiat. Such as, again, like real estate, fine art, those kind of things that have the scarcity aspects and that are difficult to replicate and debase. So wealth inequality is not just about the haves and have-nots, it's about suppressing economic mobility. Those from less privileged backgrounds find it increasingly challenging to climb the economic ladder, akin to starting a race with a heavy backpack. The growing gap between the rich and the poor causes problems for the majority, with the wealthy shaping policies in their favor. This makes things harder for regular people, leading to social unrest, a lack of trust in institutions, and communities falling apart like a house of cards. The fiat system's instability manifests in economic uncertainty, political unrest, and global repercussions when the Western world faces an economic downturn. This is a global phenomenon affecting societies in developed and developing nations alike. We only have about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to go through these two slides quickly, and then we'll stop here for questions. You're welcome to stay a little longer if you guys want. I'm not in a hurry to go. So happy to hang around and answer questions after. So the wealthy often operate on a transnational scale. They use the global financial system to their advantage, further widening the gap between the upper and lower classes. Debt has become the norm for humanity. Governments, institutions, businesses, and individuals worldwide find themselves in a sea of debt. The psychological shift towards considering debt as acceptable has its roots in the fiat system's design, right? And why is that? Well, because if your money buys less tomorrow, you might as well borrow as much as you can to buy as much as you can today and pay it back later when it's worth less, right? During past decades, it has become easier and easier to take on substantial debt, and it often becomes a necessity for ordinary people due to rising prices and living costs. And people find themselves in eventually a debt spiral where they're taking on further debts in order to pay off the debt that they can't afford to pay off today. At that point, they're in trouble. And it's not just individuals that find themselves in a debt spiral like that, it's institutions and even nation states. So consumerism, a constant urge to buy and consume, leads people to purchase more than they need, resulting in overconsumption and waste. While it may seem like a never-ending shopping spree, the real cost goes beyond the price tag, impacting people's psychological health and well-being. Again, because if we go back to the time preference, right? If we look at high time preference behaviors, those are things like gambling and drinking and wasting time on nonsense. Whereas long-term, low time preference is healthy activities like working out or studying. These things that don't necessarily pay off today, but pay off over the long term. So let's stop there. I think this is probably a good place to stop. We're about halfway through the slides. I did share those there in the chats. If you guys, let me share them again. If you guys have any questions or comments, feedback, I'm happy to take it now. You can drop them in the chat or you can speak up. Anything that wasn't clear, I see there are some comments. Let's have a look. Sorry, go ahead, Destiny.
Yeah, this was indeed an awesome section. You know, when you were busy doing the class, I was busy giving some replies in the chat box. So guys, this is a time for us to all ask questions. Dennis, I know you would have a lot of questions to ask. If you're free, please ask questions. TM says thank you, that made sense. Thanks so much to think about. Okay, Remy has a question. What are the government suggesting to stabilize fiat money?
What are they adjusting? Let me have a look what the question is. Two parents doing multiple jobs to keep up. Yep. It's everywhere, absolutely. Printing more money won't solve the inflation. No, indeed, it's at the very root of the inflation. The monetary inflation is what drives the price inflation. The fiat is worthless due to currency devaluation caused by money printing. What are the government suggesting to stabilize fiat money? Yeah, that's a good question, Remy. They use inflation rates and spending, basically, to try and control the money supply. We'll learn a little bit more about that, I believe, in this chapter. So you can look forward to covering that, I believe, on Friday, when we'll... Is it in this chapter? What is money and who controls it? So I think that was in the previous chapter, actually. So I think that might be covered in chapter 4. So they use interest rates and spending, or increase or decrease of government spending. Let me try and find the relevance slide here.
Sorry, while Glenn is searching for the slide, I have something to add, to contribute. So for the question, what are the governments suggesting to stabilize fiat money? So I don't think anything is being done, Bosun said. So I also stand on that point, because one thing about the government is that they want to keep on getting higher, they want to keep on getting in control, and the only way they can do it is at the expense of the masses, the citizens, the people who they control. So in terms of what are they doing? Well, the whole essence of removing the gold from the paper money was because they want to actually control, because they see that they cannot directly control that gold very well, so they want to control the paper, since they have direct control over the paper. So the government may not be doing something to stabilize the fiat money, but you as a person, you as a citizen, you as a as a Bitcoiner, can actually do something for yourself. You help yourself, because maybe the government may not have time for you. You help yourself. So you helping yourself is that you just try to go the extra miles. You try to do your own research, and you try to bring in your own solution. So as for the government may not be trying to help you. If you wait for the government to help you, it might take much time. So just help yourself. Thank you. But Busayo said, ask one question.
Yeah, the government's definitely the government's definitely we can look at almost pretty much every single government around the world that's on a fiat standard and see that their monetary policy is broken. It's not in the best interest of you, the individual. So that's an excellent point by Destiny. Then they're not going to, even despite their best intentions and efforts, were they well intentioned. There's really not much they can do, because the money itself is worthless, right? So, but the way that they try to let me rewind. Obviously, it's not worthless because we use it, right? They mandate that we use it. It has some value, but the value is melting away as they print more and more of it. But it's a good question. What do they do to try and stabilize it? So what they do to try and stabilize it so that it doesn't hyperinflate is they have monetary policies. They have fiscal policies. So with monetary policies, they set target rates. So you would have heard of the target rate for CPI, the Consumer Price Index.
Yes.
That's usually targeted by most central banks and governments at around 2%. Now, people often ask why 2%. Now, there's a historical precedent that was set, but I can tell you the reason is it's like boiling a frog, right? If you put the temperature too high or the inflation rate too high, the frog notices and it tries to escape. So they keep that inflation rate nice and low so that people don't notice that they're being robbed. Okay? So that's number one. They try and set the CPI at around 2 or 3%. They try and set things like the unemployment rates and the inflation rates. And then they use fiscal policies as well in order to try and increase or decrease consumer spending, or the money that's been in circulation. So with expansionary fiscal policy, this aims to increase consumers' spending and business investments to increase aggregate demand and economic growth. And how do they do this? They do it by increasing government spending, right? Paying more government contractors and contracts and so on. And they lower taxes, so people have more money to spend. Whereas on a contractionary fiscal policy, this aims to decrease consumer spending and business investment to slow down unsustainable economic growth and prevents or reduce high inflation. And they try and do this by increasing taxes and decreasing government spending. But I use that word specifically, try, because this is all centralized interference in what would otherwise be just a natural economic system. But yes, they do try. What are the solutions to hyperinflation? Stop printing so much damn money. Return to a sound money standard.
Exactly.
They're a little bit in a between a rock and a hard place. They can't stop printing money because they've got a lot of debt. So as long as the government continues its poor decision making, I think it will continue being more hard to stabilize the fiat money. Yeah. Absolutely. Bitcoin. How can someone plan for long-term goals with the problems of fiat money? That's a great question, Dennis, and it's one that like rich people have settled on things like real estate and shares in actual businesses and these sorts of assets, right? Because those things go up in value as they print more and more money. So rich people have they have more convenient ways of escaping the problems of fiat money. Up until now, it's been very difficult for a poorer person to be able to protect themselves from monetary inflation.